When my father announced that my sister was taking over the family business, everyone at the table looked at me. I think they expected me to be angry. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Congratulations, Sarah." My father smiled like he had finally made the decision he had been waiting years to make. What nobody in that room knew was that there was one detail about the business I had kept quiet about for almost 6 years. And my father had completely forgotten about it. To understand why, you have to understand my family. My father, Daniel, started a small commercial landscaping company when I was 19. It wasn't glamorous, but he built it from nothing. By the time I was in my early 30s, the company had about 20 employees, several long-term commercial contracts, and enough equipment to keep everyone busy year-round. My younger sister Sarah was always the favorite. She was charming, confident, and knew exactly how to get my father to say yes. I was different. I wasn't particularly outgoing. I liked numbers, planning, and solving problems quietly. Growing up, my dad used to say, "Sarah has the personality to run a business." Whenever I heard that, I never argued. I just kept working. When I was 22, I started helping at the company during summers. I spent weekends repairing equipment, answering phones, organizing invoices, and occasionally riding along with crews. Sarah didn't work there until she was 28. And when she finally joined, she went straight into an office. Dad gave her a title. I got a clipboard. I never complained about it. At least, not to him. Over the years, I became the person employees called when something went wrong. A truck broke down. They called me. A customer disputed an invoice. They called me. A supplier accidentally charged us twice. They called me. Dad knew this, but he never really considered it leadership. To him, Sarah was the future because she looked like someone who belonged in charge. I was just dependable, and dependable people rarely get celebrated. 6 years before the family meeting that changed everything, something happened that my father didn't know about. One of our largest commercial clients was unhappy. They had several properties across the state, and our company had nearly lost the contract because of missed scheduling deadlines and billing errors. I spent 3 months fixing the problem. I built a new scheduling system, reorganized the billing process, and personally met with the client's operations manager. Eventually, they renewed the contract. But during those meetings, I learned something important. The client didn't actually have a long-term agreement with our company. They had a contract with a separate property management division they owned. That division was looking for a local company to acquire. The opportunity was far bigger than anything my father had ever mentioned to me. I didn't tell him. Instead, I started researching. I wasn't trying to steal anything from my family. I simply wanted to know whether I could build something of my own. So I formed a small LLC. I used my savings. I bought a minority stake in that property management company. It wasn't much at first, less than 10%, but I kept reinvesting everything I earned. Over the next few years, my stake grew. Eventually, I became one of the controlling partners. The funny thing was that my father's landscaping company became one of our vendors. He never knew. Every year, he signed renewal paperwork with a company partially owned by me. I never interfered. I never raised prices. I never used my position to benefit myself unfairly. I kept the arrangement completely separate because I wanted to know whether I could succeed without my family's approval. And for the first time in my life, I did. I didn't tell my parents because I knew exactly what would happen. Dad would say I was trying to compete with him. Sarah would say I was making everything about myself. So I stayed quiet. Then came the family dinner. Dad had invited everyone to his house. My mother was there. Sarah and her husband were there. I thought it was just another Sunday dinner. After we ate, Dad stood up. He had a folder in his hand. "I've made a decision about the company," he said. Sarah immediately looked excited. I already knew. She had been talking about taking over for months. Dad looked at her. "I want you to become president." Sarah's face lit up. Mom smiled. Her husband squeezed her hand. Then Dad looked at me. "I hope you're mature enough to understand why." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he had already decided what my reaction would be. I said, "I understand." Sarah smiled. Dad continued, "You've always been good at the operational side. Sarah has the people skills. Customers like her. Employees respond to her. She's the right person." I nodded. "Okay." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "You're really not upset?" I looked at her. Why would I be? She shrugged. I don't know. You always seemed to think you were going to take over. I never said that. Dad interrupted. This isn't the time to start arguing. I wasn't arguing. He closed the folder. Good. Then we're settled. Everyone relaxed. Dinner continued. They started discussing changes Sarah wanted to make. She wanted new uniforms, a new office, a new website. She wanted to replace several older employees who had been with Dad for years. I listened. Then Sarah looked at me. I might need you around for the transition. For how long? A few months. I smiled politely. Sure. She seemed relieved. You know the company better than anyone. That sentence stayed with me, because it was the first time she had ever admitted it. 3 weeks later, the transition began, and that's when things started going wrong. Sarah changed the billing system. Invoices went out late. She changed scheduling software without training anyone. 2 major commercial clients complained. 1 employee quit. Then another. Dad blamed the employees. Sarah blamed the office manager. Nobody blamed Sarah. Except me. Quietly. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I recognized. It was the operations manager from one of the company's biggest clients. Can I ask you something? Sure. Is your sister really taking over? Yes. There was a pause. That's unfortunate. I didn't respond. He continued. We've been discussing whether to renew. I asked why. Your company has been reliable for years. We're worried about the transition. I understood exactly what he meant. The business wasn't failing, but it was becoming unstable. A month later, Dad called me. I need you to talk to Sarah. I almost smiled. About what? She thinks you're undermining her. I'm not. She says employees still come to you. They've always come to me. Well, stop. I was quiet. Dad sighed. You need to understand that she's the president now. I do. Then act like it. I said, okay. And I stopped helping. Completely. No more answering calls. No more fixing invoices. No more solving scheduling problems. I went back to my own company. I didn't tell anyone. For the first time, my father's business had to stand on its own. And within 2 months, it became obvious how much work I had been doing behind the scenes. Sarah called me one evening. You're really just going to let this happen? Let what happen? The company is struggling. I thought you were running it. I am. Then you can handle it. She was silent. You're enjoying this. No. You're lying. I don't want you to fail, Sarah. Then help me. I thought about it. Then I said, you don't need me to rescue you. You need to learn how to run it. She hung up. A week later, Dad called. He was furious. You've abandoned your family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't abandon anyone. You knew the company was in trouble. I knew Sarah was making decisions I disagreed with. You could have prevented this. I took a breath. Dad, you chose her. He didn't answer. Then he said something I still remember. I chose the child I believed in. That hurt more than I expected. I said I know, and ended the call. 2 weeks later, the biggest contract in the company was up for renewal. It was the same client whose operations manager had first introduced me to the property management company years earlier. Sarah went into the meeting alone. She came out 2 hours later looking pale. The client wasn't renewing. They were moving their landscaping contracts to another provider. Dad blamed Sarah. Sarah blamed me. She called me that night. This is your fault. I stared at the phone. How? You knew how important that contract was. Yes. And you didn't help. You asked me to stay out of the company. I didn't mean it. I closed my eyes. Sarah, I'm not doing this. You always wanted Dad's company. No. Yes, you did. I finally said, you don't know what I wanted. Then I hung up. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The operations manager from that client called me again. He asked if we could meet. We met at a coffee shop. He slid a folder across the table. Your father's company can't fulfill the contract anymore. I nodded. He continued. But we're not looking for another landscaping company. I looked at him. We're looking for a regional property services partner. I opened the folder. It was a proposal, a very large one, and my company was being invited to bid. The company I had quietly built. The company my father didn't know existed. The company that had grown partly because I had spent years learning everything from his business without taking anything from it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call my parents. I went home and studied the proposal. Then I called my partners. We submitted our bid. 3 weeks later, we won. It was the largest contract my company had ever received. And because the contract involved several states, we needed more employees, more equipment, and more office space. For the first time, I had to admit something to myself. I wasn't the overlooked son anymore. I was a business owner. But I still didn't tell my family. Then Dad found out. He called me at 9 on a Monday morning. Is it true? I knew immediately. Yes. You own that company? Yes. You've been doing this for years? Yes. There was a long silence. How much of that property management company do you own? I told him. He didn't speak. Then he asked, why didn't you tell me? I thought about all the years I had spent trying to prove myself. I didn't think you'd care. He took a breath. That isn't fair. No, I said quietly. It isn't. He invited me over that evening. When I arrived, Mom and Sarah were already there. Sarah looked angry. Dad looked tired. He had the same folder from the dinner where he had handed the company to Sarah. He placed it on the table. I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything. Sarah crossed her arms. Dad looked at her. You weren't ready. Sarah looked stunned. Dad, let me finish. She went quiet. He turned toward me. I spent years thinking you were the quiet one because you didn't have ambition. I smiled sadly. I was quiet because I got tired of asking to be seen. Mom looked down. Dad swallowed. I should have known. I didn't know what to say. Then Sarah spoke. So what now? Dad looked at me. I want you to buy the company. I shook my head. No. Everyone stared at me. Why? Because I don't want it. Dad looked confused. It's our family business. I know. You've spent your whole life working there. That doesn't mean I want to own it. He sat back. What do you want? I thought about the question. For years, I had wanted my father's approval. I had wanted him to look at me the way he looked at Sarah. I had wanted him to say that I was capable. But sitting there, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I want you to stop deciding what I'm worth. Nobody spoke. I continued. Sarah can run the business if she wants. If she doesn't, you can sell it. But I don't want it handed to me as an apology. Dad's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know I hurt you that badly. I said I know. Sarah looked at me. Do you hate me? No. Even after everything? No. She looked down. I thought you were jealous of me. I wasn't. What were you jealous of? I smiled. The fact that you never had to wonder whether Dad believed in you. She started crying. It was the first time I had ever seen Sarah genuinely understand what our childhood had been like for me. Dad eventually sold the landscaping company to one of the longtime managers. Sarah found another job outside the family business. And I continued running my company. Nothing changed overnight. There were no dramatic apologies. No perfect family reunion. No sudden transformation. My father still made mistakes. So did I. But something did change. He started calling me to ask for advice instead of giving me instructions. Sometimes we'd talk about business. Sometimes we'd talk about nothing. And one afternoon, almost a year after that dinner, Dad visited my office. He looked around at the employees, the conference rooms, and the wall covered with maps showing all the regions we served. Then he smiled. You built all this. I nodded. He looked at me for a long moment. I always thought Sarah was the ambitious one. I laughed quietly. So did I. He shook his head. No, I was wrong. Those 3 words meant more to me than any inheritance could have. Not because they changed the past. They didn't. But because, for once, my father wasn't asking me to prove anything. He was simply acknowledging the truth. And that was the detail my father had forgotten all those years ago. He thought the family business was the most valuable thing he could give his children. He never realized that while everyone else was fighting over what he had built, I had quietly built something of my own. I didn't take the company from my sister. I didn't expose her. I didn't sabotage my father. I just stopped trying to earn a place at a table where I had spent my whole life being measured against someone else. And eventually, without revenge or anger, I built a life where I didn't need that seed anymore. The strange part is, my father thought he had finally decided who deserved the family business that night. What he didn't realize was that years earlier, I had already made a decision of my own. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the child he wanted. I was going to become the man I respected. And in the end, that turned out to be worth far more than the family business ever could have been.